So again, thanks everyone for joining us. My name's Leanne Marshall. I'm one of the co-facilitators of the Shelter Cash and Markets CoP. And that's together with Jenny Wetherill, who's also with us on the call, who many of you know. But I know, as I said, that there's heaps of people who are tied up with operations at the moment, so we will be recording. But I think hopefully we'll have enough to have a bit of a discussion here anyway. So the topic of today's call, as mentioned in the invite, will be mainly on market-based programming and how this can link to shelter response. So we're really grateful to have our wonderful colleagues from the Markets in Crises community of practice as well, and they're going to help us to kick off this conversation. We'll just show you the agenda. So yeah, we're going to have Pacey from Reach, who will take some time to give us a bit of an overview about market-based programming and how it applies to shelter. And then he'll also talk a little bit more about a guidance note that we're, as the Shelter Cash and Markets CoP, are working with the Markets in Crisis CoP together on around market-based programming and shelter. So we hope that we can then take some time to have a bit of a group discussion about what types of markets might be most relevant to your shelter programming, so that the guidance note and any other support that we are undertaking can be appropriately targeted. And then we will have, following that discussion, we just want to have the opportunity for any colleagues on the call to share relevant CVA activities that they may be engaged in around the Ukraine response, or just have that as an opportunity for different partners to reach out to see who's planning activities and what you're doing. So I really hope that that can be a useful opportunity for you all as well. So then at the end, we'll also have a bit of time for any other business and opportunities for additional sharing and questions from the group. So are there any questions on the agenda, anything that you'd like to add before we kick off? Yes, AOB integration of environmental considerations. That would be great, Pablo. And we had kind of thought to talk about the Cash Champions work there. So that would be really good. So we'll definitely add that to any other business. Thank you. If there's nothing else, then I might actually move on and pass over to Chris from Reach to give us a bit more of an overview of market-based programming.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Leanne. So just a quick introduction. As Leanne said, my name is Chris Pacey with Reach. I'm the Global Cash and Markets Assessment Specialist with Reach. But today I'm here representing the Markets and Crises community of practice, for which I sit on the advisory committee. And I've been asked to give a quick overview of basically market-based programming and how it can be applied in shelter situations. And then after this quick introduction, we'll move into a bit of an exercise to get some input from you and some expertise from the other members of the group on some of the markets that would be most relevant to look at in this area. Can we go to the next slide? Great, thanks. So first of all, I just want to explain who we are, who MIC is. So the Markets and Crises Community of Practice, it's a community of over 2,800 practitioners from over 120 countries and a variety of different backgrounds. We represent NGOs, multilateral agencies, academic institutions, as well as donor agencies and members of the private sector as well. But the common thread among all of us is that we have the shared aim of improving market-based programming in emergency, recovery, and development context. At the moment, we are in the middle of a 3-year plan to expand our scope, our scale, and our impact. And one of the major, this 3-year plan is developing a learning agenda to support the broader adoption of market-based programming in various areas of humanitarian response and development. So some of our current areas of focus are producing guidance on core market-based programming fundamentals. We also have a group that's looking at climate change and how it affects MVP. And then finally, there's the group that I'm representing today. So Mick and the Shelter Cash and Markets CoP, we are currently working together to develop a joint guidance note on how market-based programming can apply to shelter markets. And we'll get into that a bit more in the discussion phase later. Next slide. Okay, so before we jump into specific discussions of MVP and shelter, I was asked to first give a brief, just a brief intro to some key terminology, just to make sure that we're all on the same page before moving into that discussion. So first of all, just to clarify what we're talking about when we say the word market. So a market is just any system of exchange at all between two or more actors. It can be for goods, it can be for services, it can be for money or anything else. It doesn't necessarily need to be tied to a physical space. It can be decentralized. We can talk, for example, about the wheat market for all wheat farmers operating within a certain country. Or it can even be virtual. It can take place entirely online. And there are many different types of markets. We usually think of commodity markets, but there are also markets for services, for labor, for currency, for many other things. Um, and so a marketplace, on the other hand, is a physical location where these exchanges take place. Or in the modern day, it can also be a virtual platform, can also take place entirely online. But this is one of the main points of confusion that I personally hear between the idea of just a general market and the idea of the physical location, which is more properly a marketplace. Um, then the next term, so supply chains are basically a supply chain is a chain of relationships linking all market actors that are involved in moving a product from the beginning, which is the producer, to the end of the chain, which is the consumer. So it's basically everybody who is involved along the way and how they are related to each other. And then final term I want to talk about is an overall market system. And this is sort of what we're going to be talking about with market-based programming. It's a market system is sort of everything. It's all of the actors in a market, all of the relationships between them, the services and support that all of these actors need in order to operate, and also the overall market environment within the context in which they work. So all of these things together are what market-based programming tries to look at in a very holistic sense to try to understand where interventions are best targeted. Can you go to the next slide? Okay, so now we can get into what is market-based programming itself. On the left side of the slide is what we call the market-based programming framework, which was put together by Mick several years ago and has been updated a few times since then. I won't go through every aspect of this because it's pretty rich and there are quite a few different elements in there, but I'll go through some of the main points. So basically, market-based programming is a broad term that covers all types of projects that engage with market systems in some way. And this can be just at the very basic level, using existing markets in humanitarian crises and development context. So, for example, household cash and voucher assistance is a good example of this, as well as in-kind distributions that use local procurement efforts. But then if you go out a little bit more and you consider this market system and how it's working and how it can function better in a more holistic way, then you start getting into interventions that seek to support markets, for example, to increase the capacity of existing supply chains or to enable people to use new payment modalities like mobile money or smart cards in order to make their purchases and increase financial inclusion in that way. So basically making small changes and small improvements to the market to make sure it functions better for the people in crisis. And then finally, there's market system change, which is trying to create lasting shifts in how the market works to make sure that it's better able to provide all the items and all the services that people in crisis need. So when we talk about CBA or when we talk about market-based programming, usually what's proposed and what's talked about most often is cash and voucher assistance, or CVA, and that's of course the main focus of this group, but it's far from being the only type of market-based programming, as I think you can see from here. Can you go to the next slide? Great, thanks. So market-based programming can engage with market systems at several key points, and these correspond to the different segments of this framework that you can see at the left. So you can have programs that work primarily on the supply side that address issues of availability of key goods that are needed for people in crisis to meet their needs. You can also work on the demand side to address issues of access to goods. And this can be divided into issues of physical access, like making sure that people are able to get to markets and are able to buy that the goods themselves are also able to get to the markets. It can be financial access, like if the goods are available, but they can't, but it's impossible for most people to afford them. Or you can also look at issues of social access to markets. For example, if you're talking about a rental market, for example, where people of certain groups or ethnicities are excluded from applying for rental properties, that's an example of an issue of social access that market-based programming can potentially help to correct. So some market-based programming also looks at improving key market infrastructure and services, like, for example, improving the roads to markets to make sure that more trade can happen and it's easier for goods to get in and out of a certain area. And then finally, there's also the potential to conduct advocacy for the reform of market policies, norms, and rules. And this is something that's a little rarer, but it's something where large agencies like ours can potentially have an important impact to basically use our size and influence and power to negotiate with government officials and potentially management of financial institutions and other large entities like that to try to improve financial inclusion, try to improve access to markets for people in crisis, to create a sort of lasting change within the market system. Can you go to the next? Okay, so now we can get into how market-based programming applies to shelter itself. And the short answer is in many, many ways. So as you know, obtaining adequate shelter, whether this means renting a flat or an apartment, whether it means buying a house or buying land or building your own house, no matter what it is, no matter what country you're in, no matter what context you're in, it represents one of the largest financial burdens that most households are ever going to face. Usually behind only food, in some cases actually much more expensive than food in certain parts of the world. So it's a very complex and very expensive process, and nearly every aspect of it interacts with market systems in some way. So we were talking about housing and rental markets just now, which are a clear example of the interaction with a market system. It's for household NFIs, things like heating, fuel, and weatherproofing to make sure that a shelter is livable in all seasons. The markets, of course, for tools and construction materials for those who are purchasing or maintaining their own shelters, or building or maintaining their own shelters, rather. And then there are also markets for labor and basic services, things like construction, plumbing, electricity, things of that sort that are also needed in order to make a shelter livable. So all of these are market systems, and in most cases, in most contexts where we work, all of these market systems are already going to exist in some fashion. And it's very, very important to understand how they exist and what their characteristics are, because if we don't, we as humanitarian actors risk undermining these market systems and also undermining the livelihoods that go along with them if our programs bypass them, replace them, or even just forget about them rather than working with them. Can you go to the next? Great, thanks. So as I was touching on, so market-based programming, including CDA, can often be a strong alternative to in-kind shelter NFI distributions. It depends on the context of work and the local conditions. But in many cases, it can be ideal, especially in cases where local market systems and supply chains for the items we're targeting remain reasonably intact. This is sort of a classic situation in which a CBA would be very appropriate. But market-based programming can also shine in situations where market functionality or where markets are not quite working the way they should, where perhaps market functionality is limited in some ways, but it's limited in such a way where we can identify clear bottlenecks and we can identify ways in which we as humanitarian actors can work to correct those bottlenecks and make sure that the markets function in a more effective way. And eventually, market-based program with the aim of strengthening these market systems to the point where outside aid might no longer be needed. If you have a well-designed MVP intervention, it will ideally have multiplier effects throughout these targeted market systems. It will ideally create income-generating opportunities. It'll preserve existing lives, potentially improve local infrastructure as well, all on its way to meeting the final goal of the intervention, which is meeting a community's basic shelter needs and supporting markets in that goal. Next slide. Okay, so now we can start talking about the guidance note itself. So this will be the last slide, and then I'll turn over to Leanne and Jenny for facilitating the main discussion. But just to give you a sense of what we've been working on together, what Mick and the Shelter Cash and Markets CoP have been working on together. So we're putting together a short guidance note with the goal of providing an overview of how market-based programming can be integrated into all stages of the shelter response, both in the emergency phase, in the recovery phase, as well as in the development phase. Currently, the guidance note is divided into several sections, and you can see the list on the slide. So basically starting out, actually sort of running through many of the same topics that this presentation has run through in shortened form. So basically starting out with what is market-based programming, explaining the MVP framework and some of the basic terminology surrounding markets, talking about how market-based programming can be applied to shelter responses. Then we start getting into more detail about key types of shelter markets to focus on and their characteristics. Exploring issues of market complexity in shelter, and giving some examples and case studies of how MVP has been used and can be used for shelter interventions. And finally, a section on key links and resources, just for collected resources that already exist. So I guess the first question for discussion is, does this seem like a sufficient structure to you? Does it seem like something that will be useful? Or are there other sections that you would really want guidance on as well, as you think through the possibilities of implementing MVP in shelter contexts worldwide? So yeah, I'll leave that question out there, and I'll turn back to Leanne to start up the discussion. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Chris. I think that's really useful and good to sort of go back to basics and give that overview of MVP. But it would be great. I'm not sure whether anyone's got any immediate thoughts about this guidance note and some of these initial sections that we're already working on, which Chris has outlined. Is there anything that anyone can see sort of straight off the bat that they'd like to mention that it might be missing, or that they'd like to see, or that they have encountered in their own work that they'd like additional assistance on? And if there was a guidance note that they need anything, feel free to just put your hand up or put something in the chat. And equally, we can take in feedback later. Jamie?
I was just, no, it looks really good. A couple of things that I was thinking about, and they're probably integrated in there already. One was around protection, and where, thinking of those protection considerations. And then the other one was around kind of integrated programming. How we connect with livelihoods and other sectors.
Yeah, very good, because I think the protection issues definitely come into that kind of complexity of shelter markets. But I think very good point to mention about the integrated program. So thank you for that, Jamie.
Okay, thanks.
Jim?
Hi there. Thanks, Leanne. So I think the sections that are listed on the slide are probably all of the correct section titles. I think the devil is going to be in the details. And I think a couple of different things. One is somewhere in either the section, how could MBP be applied to shelter responses, or key types of shelter markets, or market complexity in shelter, there needs to be a discussion of how that aligns with the different phases of shelter programming, from emergency to recovery, whether that's natural disaster, largely non-displaced versus conflict, displacement, protracted crises, things like that. Secondly, probably looking again somewhere in those three sections about defining the scope of your market. I was very interested to, it was very good to get that reminder of the definition of what is a market versus a marketplace at the beginning. And I think too often when shelter practitioners go off and try and do their market emergency market analysis, it tends to be a marketplace analysis. You go down to the local bazaar and count how many shops are still selling nylon rope. Whereas in many cases, we know that actually what we need to also think about is also that longer international delivery chain. There's many examples, in the Middle East, for instance, where key shelter or construction materials come entirely from other countries. And so the market analysis for somewhere in Lebanon actually needs to be a visit to factories in central Turkey or something like that. And so, getting that into and well established into those sections. And then I think the other two things to try and tie in, one is, and again, the section titles are probably correct. It's just slotting them in. One is looking at how that ties into the knowledge needed from different shelter actors, whether you're a program manager, whether you're a cluster coordinator, or whether you're somebody who actually is going to have to go into all of those shops and ask whether there's been any changes in the prices of nails. And then also looking at some of the issues which Jamie just touched on, protection, market accessibility to materials, seeing how that ties into some of the other work that's being done in the sector on disability inclusion and things like that. And then also a last one, which would be quality control.
Excellent. Jim, you know that I'm going to be tapping you on the shoulder some assistance in this, but all extremely good points, and I think and very well taken, and a number of those things I think that especially around that knowledge needed for different types of actors as well. I think that we often forget about that when we're developing these guidance notes. I think everything that you've mentioned there we'll take down and try and include. Thank you. Saki, and then Angel.
Thanks. Jim just kind of triggered some thoughts while I look at the topics. And as we're emergency recovery development, if we're tackling all of that, but we're still within the shelter, probably we do talk about rental, and that may be kind of still in the kind of housing market kind of area. Like shelter market, just as a kind of envelope, just kind of feels more on the material side. So maybe kind of bringing in the terminology of housing markets, and then which kind of connects with the housing financing or rental kind of markets. Might be useful. Yeah.
Yeah, good point, Zaki. And it is something that we have already started to kind of include, and so it's sort of housing construction and that, like other, rather than just saying shelter markets, because we are aware of that sort of longer term kind of thinking. And I think this is probably linked to Pablo's point in here as well in terms of is preparedness included. Definitely make sure there's that strong section on preparedness, and then linking to existing housing markets. Very good point. Okay, Angel?
Yes, I just had a couple of comments on maybe to add an additional section on risks and monitoring, particularly looking at the issues related to potentials of corruption in market-related issues with not only shelter but the NFI items. You know, just to give the example of what happened years ago in Gaziantep, that all of the suppliers got basically amending the prices to make sure that they would get more money. So all of the suppliers were getting interconnected to make some sort of corruption issues. So yeah, something related to monitoring risks and corruption prevention. And then the other comment I wanted to make is how we can be more flexible in making sure that we work with markets in a different way. We tend to do, for example, procurement. You select a supplier, and then one single supplier floods the market in a local community. What happens tends to be that that supplier is the sole provider. So I'm not going to use a shelter example, but just an education one as an example. So you get one supplier that's going to provide all of the school material for an entire town. If there's any local library that sells material, are frozen.
Oh,
Out frozen, right?
I can still. Hello. Oh, we lost Angel.
Yeah, he disappeared.
Oh, okay, but people can hear me. Okay.
No, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, sorry. I'm talking through Sadia's mic because my computer went frozen. So sorry. No, I mean, just to not to lose the train of thought, I was saying, just giving the example in education market, for example, the typical thing that you get one supplier to provide books and pens for every child in a single town. If there are local suppliers, a local librarian, basically you destroy their all livelihood income for the next year because the entire material has been supplied, for example. Yeah. That can also happen with the shelter material. So if there is a way that we can look on how to work through markets that not only use the typical system of procurement, that you go through the one single supplier and then affect the income and livelihoods of others in the local places where we are working. Sorry, I'll try to log off in my own computer and return.
That's fine. No, points well taken. And yeah, I mean, that risks and monitoring, I think it's important to know that we're trying to bring that up in the market complexity section. But I think you're right that we might need to build on that a bit more in terms of not just mentioning that these things are potential issues, but then how do we actually deal with those and how do we mitigate some of those risks? And I think that step is currently missing, and absolutely take on board around that flexibility of markets. Okay. They're excellent points. So thank you very much, everyone. And feel free to come back to us if you have any other thoughts. I'll just quickly mention how we're going about this. So yes, as Jenny said, really great inputs. This is so useful. What we're going to do is try and get a draft to you all by the end of April. So that's sort of a bit more polished, and we've taken into some of these inputs and other examples, and we'll be searching for sort of any kind of feedback and examples from you around market-based program that we can include in that as well. And then we will get responses hopefully from you all by early May, and then we will then finalize that so that we will have the guidance note ready for kind of launch at the Global Shelter Cluster meetings in late June, early July. So I think we will keep you up to date with that process, but that's just a quick overview of how we're trying to approach this. So without further ado, though, one of the the sections that we've mentioned up here is those key types of shelter markets. And so I might hand over to Jenny now, because we're just going to take a little bit of time to talk to you a little bit about some of those key shelter markets, and get some inputs about where you think are the priority areas that we need to be looking at and need to make sure that are included within this guidance note. So thanks, Jenny. I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Leanne, and hi, everybody. So we wanted to spend, maybe we can take about 10 minutes just to start brainstorming a little bit some of the kind of most priority markets that we engage with, as you know, in our shelter and settlements programming. So I think this comes in maybe a little bit to your point, Zeki, about we're talking about shelter markets, but maybe housing markets is more appropriate. And we want to just make sure that we're capturing, you know, the priority market systems that shelter and settlement practitioners would need to understand. And one section you'll have seen from Chris's overview of the guidance note is we'll kind of unpack and define a little bit what some of these critical market systems are for the sector. So far we have some kind of broad buckets that we've popped in this Jamboard, which Leanne has just shared the link of in the chat. So if you guys can, oh, fabulous, thanks Leanne, I was just going to ask you to do that. So if everybody can just open it and make sure that you can access the Jamboard. What we would like to do is just brainstorm a few examples of different markets within each of these categories. And here we're really talking about, you know, markets that we would need to understand or find out more about during our assessment process, and also what might influence our response. So this would be markets where, you know, our target participants are using to meet their shelter needs, as well as markets that we might interact with for our response. So in the board, you'll see we've got 5 buckets so far, and these were mainly taken from the training actually that was designed by, I think, Jim and colleagues on cash and shelter. So we've got a bucket around commodities and materials. So this might be things like construction materials like bricks or whatever that we would use for shelter construction. The second bucket is around labour. So this might include, you know, daily labour or unskilled labour that we might use in cash for work programmes, or it could be more specialised types of labour that we would need for shelter reconstruction or repair. The third bucket is around rental. So this could be related to, you know, land or housing rental. The fourth bucket is around financial services. So this could be small loans for traders to expand their stocks of, you know, shelter construction materials, for example, or it could also be financial services like for households to be able to, like, you know, rebuild or buy their home. The fifth bucket is around legal services, which could be related to residency permits or other. And then we also have space here on the bottom right for other types of markets. And so hopefully after we've brainstormed a little bit, I'm expecting we may see some other categories that we're kind of missing, and then we can relook at these buckets and how we're sort of defining shelter markets. So I thought we could take maybe like 4 minutes for everybody just to have a think themselves and start to add sticky notes with examples under each bucket. And then we can come back together, and if anyone, you know, has anything that they want to share or highlight, we can do that as a group. So any questions? Is that clear?
Jamie, yeah?
Yes, go ahead, Jamie.
Is it about frequency? You know, that how often we you know, that we're always dealing with labour, always dealing with rent, you know, with markets, but is it more about kind of difficulty or complexity, relevance in terms of what's going to be really useful to us?
That's a good question. I would say both, probably, like most commonly used or frequently used, as well as complexity, which might mean that we need to like dig a bit deeper during our market analysis to understand it a bit more. So I would say both.
Great, thanks.
Okay, I see people have started to add. So We'll take like 5 minutes just to add some ideas,
Jenny,
and
I
then we'll
had
come back
a
together.
question.
Oh,
Sorry,
go ahead.
my hand
ahead.
was up. No worries.
Sorry, I didn't see you.
Is there a sense of phasing here? Because you could talk about relevancy during emergency, or perhaps a bit into the recovery phase, and dare I say further along where you've got preparedness. And all. Should we make a differentiation, or is it just putting everything there for now and we'll see?
I think if we think a differentiation is useful, then yes, we hadn't really thought about that. But if you want to make a note on sticky notes, if it's like more relevant for emergency or preparedness, then please do, because that could be something we incorporate in the guidance note as we like sum it all up. So,
All right, great, thanks.
And just if anyone's having trouble with Jamboard entering it, just feel free to pop something in the chat or call out and we can put it in there as well. No problem. Sadie, is your hand up again, or is that?
No, that's a previous one.
Let's see.
Let me take it out.
No problem. Okay, I wasn't sure. Thanks.
Okay, thanks everyone. I can see some really good inputs and people are still adding. What we could maybe do is leave the Jamboard open so people can keep adding a couple of thoughts after the call as well, in case you've got any burning ideas that you want to add. Maybe just as we wrap up, I don't know if anyone has any observations or anything in particular you wanted to highlight or share as you were thinking about that, or anything that you see maybe that isn't quite right in terms of how we've bucketed the types of markets. I think one question that we were having internally as we were like working on the guidance document was where to put maybe energy, and should that be its own kind of bucket, or should we be referring to that under kind of more maybe complementary market systems linked to shelter and settlements? I don't know if anyone has any thoughts about that, like where to kind of fit energy in these buckets, like fuel, heating, water. Water's not energy, but I'm just thinking of utilities and other services. Jamie, if you want to go, I can see you typing. If you want to go ahead and unmute, it's fine too.
Sure. Yeah. No, I'm just wondering on that one is, you know, we're often putting that in an NFI type bucket, and obviously it's important. So we're getting energy there. But I'm just thinking now, you know, in coming back from Ukraine, you know, where we were looking at all of those NFI, some of those kind of heavier NFI items as well that make the house habitable. So, you know, furniture and equipment and things like that. So, but energy does seem quite. It comes up a lot, doesn't it, in terms of our response. And then just what I've unmuted. Yeah, I think logistics transport is quite a significant market as well. It definitely has a big impact.
Great, thanks, Jamie. Yeah, definitely noted. Any other inputs from anyone else so far? Otherwise, please do keep adding any ideas that you have, and maybe back to you, Leanne, for the next agenda point, because I know that we're running out of time.
Thanks so much, Jenny, and thanks everyone for your inputs. Yeah, I think there's some really good stuff on there. And as Jenny said, please do continue. We will have some notes following this and outline that process, as I mentioned again. But also, I'll just like put the link for the Jamboard in there again in case you have any other thoughts going on. But we will like integrate all of this within that guidance note, and hopefully that'll all make sense. But you'll have another opportunity to input and I guess, yeah, be able to help the direction of this. So that'd be really great. Thank you. So yeah, I might stop sharing that. I think we just want to spend a little bit of time, and I know we are running a little bit short. We maybe should have made this an hour and a half, but really appreciate your engagement so far. And just wanted to have some time to discuss any kind of updates from anyone who's engaged in any kind of CVA activities within Ukraine, and just so that we're all kind of able to share and just have that space to talk about it. So wondering whether anyone is doing anything, and I think Seki, I don't want to say that you have been pre-placed, but would you like to lead off that conversation?
Sure. Okay. Yeah, just wanted to be able to share what we're doing in Moldova. Really kind of broad stroke is that there has been like a flow of people coming in, about 400,000, and about 100,000 are staying there in country, and about 70% are in host conditions, friends, families, or strangers. I think 11% are in rental accommodation, and then people in collective centers is quite small, fortunately. Everything. So I was there like in the first 2 weeks of the response, trying to work out what we should be doing, and we decided to focus on the hosting population, as that's the majority. And as we know that kind of in the first initial phases, like people are very welcoming, and then as time goes past, like things might get resources might get depleted, as well as kind of the welcoming nature. So we spent some time. What I learned, like with spending time with the community and the mayors and all the CBOs and stuff, was that we kind of said, okay, like what would help these people to continue to host, as well as to incentivize others to host. We started off with a really interesting conversation. It was really freezing, right, at the start. So it was like -5 degrees. Oh, it felt like -10 degrees. So like it was really interesting, saying coming back to the conversation before, saying that we would love. Like, there was many people in the community saying that we would love to host, but we can't afford the fuel. We can't afford a warm space for people. So then, like, we were discussing, okay, like, should we give a bit of grant for your gas bill, or is it easier for us to order some wood for you? That thing, so you can. So then it's kind of like the conversation quickly transpired, saying like, okay, like, we don't know, it might just last for 2 weeks, like this winter's thing. It might get cold. I mean, warm, like, really quickly. So with our cash team, like, we said, okay, like, let's just do cash as a start. Hosting cash for hosts to be able to accommodate as a starting point. And it's just a starting point. It's like one component to encourage people to continue. And then the second component would be to use that same system to incentivize new hosts to offer their place. The third kind of follow-on component is for us to work with the host to have some standards, space standards, as well as code of conduct into that mix. And then this is a little bit further on, like that with feeling like if the demand, if more people come over and we really need more stock for people to offer more, then we can go on to kind of refurbishing and offering furnishing as either procured or as cash. And then the last one was like for the rental subsidies. So we don't know which one might be good, or it might not be sequential. But what I learned this time around was that, like many other situations, that we come kind of quite strongly and kind of just offer the rental kind of straight off. Like, and the mayor was saying, like, please don't do that yet. You know, like, we want to welcome people. We want to kind of capitalize on people's pride to welcome people into our community, and we don't want it to become a profitable market by the host community. So we took that on and we said, okay, like, well, let's go slowly, kind of let's accompany the community in increasing our support, so they keep on top of their kind of enthusiasm to host. So yeah, that's our plan, and we're going strong. We're kind of, the team are kind of out there, kind of like community by community. They're kind of working with them to get this going. That's it.
Excellent. Thanks, Seki. That's really interesting. And like, just really good to hear about the kind of incremental nature of the sort of support that you're proposing, as you said, and just to hear that feedback from the mayors. I mean, it makes a lot of sense, but it's good to be aware of that. So I just wonder whether anyone has any questions for you, or any feedback based on that, whether you're also involved in similar discussions, or would like to link up with anyone to have these discussions. Feel free to put your hand up as well. Oh, thanks, Jamie, in Hungary. Looking at host incentives. Okay. Fantastic. That's great. Are there any other organizations who are engaging in any of these discussions so far? The CRS? I know IFRC thinking about rental, but obviously that's a little bit further down the line. feel free to unmute.
I just have a quick question, Leanne, and this is my ignorance. But I just wondered, I know that obviously the cluster system's active inside Ukraine, but I'm not sure how involved like the shelter cluster is in the neighbouring countries that are hosting refugees, and kind of if there's been any discussions at the cluster level about the shelter response. And I'm sure probably everybody but me knows this on the call, but just interested to know like how the coordination around approaches is working in the refugee hosting countries.
No, good question. And I think we have, well, Angel, you've got your hand up. You may be able to answer that immediately.
Yeah, no, just to say that, you know, Ma'am, I don't know if you can hear me or see me. Yeah, Mamen is there, and there's already 2 national persons that were there before the conflict started. So coordination is ongoing. Mamen is also participating in some of the meetings that UNHCR creates for the regional refugee response. But of course, there's a difference between the refugee response and that of the cluster, which is covering only inside Ukraine. But that said, I mean, just to mention that she has been having, I think, 3 meetings with different ministries related to the hosting arrangements, and the government in Ukraine is really looking at the hosting solutions being used in the neighboring countries. So it's not only the cluster, it's also the governmental officials in Ukraine that are looking at what's happening in the neighboring countries to replicate or have lessons learned or things like that. Yeah.
Oh, that's super useful. Thanks, Angel. Yeah, really good to know. And I think what might be good is that if we have any other further information, that we're able to share this within the Shelter Cash and Markets webpage on the Global Shelter Cluster, that people can actually share what they're doing around that space as well. Dipty's going to join us for the last 2 minutes. Is there another hand up? No. Because if we're done then with just updates, as I said, please continue to share that on the Global Shelter Cluster webpage for our COP. Very, very quickly, I just want to move to any other business. And Pablo, you had just put down the piece about environmental considerations, the integration of environmental considerations. Did you want to quickly talk to that?
Maybe just a heads up that obviously we've got a grant ongoing from ECHO to promote the integration of environmental considerations in global shelter cluster activities. Obviously, this includes all of the activities of the global shelter cluster working groups and communities of practice now, including this community of practice. So whatever products developed, guidance on market-based programming and shelter, please, we should make sure that the environmental considerations are either integrated across the document and or we have a specific section on environmental considerations. There isn't clear evidence one way or the other that the use of cash is greener or not. It very much depends, obviously, on the local markets, etc. But yeah, also that we are in the process. We obviously already have an environment global focal point, Madeleine Marara, but her activities that do not necessarily include the support to integration of these considerations in working groups and communities of practice. We are in the process of recruiting an environmental advisor, and we will let you know when she or he is on board and put you in touch with her in due course, because she will have in her DOR the role to support working groups and communities of practice in integrating these environmental considerations.
Fantastic. Okay, thanks so much, Pablo. I think that's really useful. And Jenny, I don't know whether, just to finish up, whether you wanted to touch on the CAS champion at all.
Yeah, just to mention really, and I know we have, I think Jamie's still on the line, he's leading this on the CRS side, but CRS is kind of responsible for leading one component of the ECHO grant that Pablo mentioned, which is providing surge cash and markets champion support to clusters or equivalent coordinating bodies. So I think we have 2 countries that we can provide support on under the grant, and there'll be an expression of interest getting sent around to the different clusters, if I understood correctly, to kind of make a call for clusters that might be interested in receiving this support. And that would be kind of yes, urge support to develop response options related to cash and markets, considering environmental considerations, or maybe developing tools, doing market analysis with an environmental component. So I think the scope is quite flexible based on what the priorities are in country. I don't know, Jamie, if you've got anything else to add.
No, I think you captured that really well, Jenny. Thanks very much. That was, I think the other thing is that we're looking to kind of see where we can is to kind of integrate it with some of the other initiatives. So we've got 2 other initiatives around localization, and the other one is looking at pilot projects. So if we can look to integrate some of those items, we are trying to do that. But thanks very much.
Fantastic, thank you. And yes, we can also share those things both with the notes that are here today, but also that we will send out after today, but also on the Global Shelter Cluster website as well. Again, I think it's just really good for us to keep using that and being able to discuss things ongoing. So please feel free to use that as a resource and call on different people who are working on different items, and that's a good forum to be able to continue those discussions. So I am just conscious that we have gone over time, and apologies for that, everyone, but just to call out for any quick last anything that you want to mention, any points that you want to note. We will have another quarterly meeting, we're thinking around July, and maybe we can combine that with the Global Shelter Cluster meetings, because I assume that there will be the opportunity within those meetings to have a catch up. But I think it would be really great, to get it within those meetings, within that time. And please let us know if there's any priority areas that you would like to focus on, any themes that you would like assistance on as well. So feel free to either put something in the chat now, or you can email us at any time. And again, you can use the forum on the website. I'm trying to push everyone to go to the website because I do think it's a really good platform that we aren't sort of capitalizing enough. But do let us know if there's anything that you would like to hear from us, support that you would appreciate, or anything that you'd like to share. So if there's nothing else, thank you, Jenny. So yes, that community of practice page on the Global Shelter Cluster website is in the chat now if you haven't already been there, but if you're here, you've probably gotten the news items, so that's good. So yes, I'll finish up and let you go. Thank you again for joining. We'll send out some notes after this and follow up on some of the items. Really appreciate your inputs into the guidance note, and we'll be in touch with the next steps on that as well. So thank you all for being here, and we will see you soon.
Thanks, Leanne. Thanks, everyone.